Okay, that's 11 o'clock. It's time to start the webinar. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be dealing with job costing, the back office support for delivering projects against contracts. The audio for today's webinar is going to be via the broadcast stream. There's no dial-in option. We haven't done that. We haven't had it used for the last couple of webinars. Last time we didn't have a dial-in option. We survived. There were a couple of issues with the audio, which hopefully are going to be ironed out today. If you have any questions while we're going through, please do put them in the chat box. There's a little icon, if you can't see the chat box, that brings it up. Put those in, and if it's to do with how the webinar's running, someone will come and give me some feedback about that, or try and resolve your issue. If it's a question to do with what we're talking about, we're going to take questions at the end, so I'll be looking at what's in the chat box when we get to the Q&A section. If you haven't joined us for one of our webinars before, we're focusing on business requirements. We're not simply doing a demo of software features. So today we're looking at the needs of businesses that deliver projects against a contract, understanding how this affects the way they engage with their customers and the process and information requirements that they have. We're going to be looking at what features support this in both Sage 50 and SAP Business One. That's software. They're both popular software packages. They're packages that we have particular expertise in, as they are core products that we provide as part of our fully managed secure cloud online 50 service. And today's webinar really has the aim of empowering users to make informed choices about the most appropriate software to use for their own businesses. Okay, let's crack on. We're using the term job costing today, which historically is the term given to this way of operating by software companies. It's closely related to a number of other areas, including profit center accounting, which we discussed in our last webinar. We're extending the concepts we spoke about last time to deal specifically with both the external, so customer facing, and internal requirements that come from delivering projects and having to collect costs and revenues represented in transactions into jobs. As well as the phrase job costing, other terms may be used by software vendors to cover specific feature sets in software, or to create a distinction between specific products. As we're focusing on the business requirements, not the software today, we're going to use the term job costing for the general phrase to describe what we mean. We acknowledge other terms that are in use, and in particular both Sage 50 accounts and SAP Business One, so the two packages we said we'll look at today, use the term project for the way in which the costs and revenues are collated for a particular job. Today we're dealing with the financial administrative side of the business requirements. We're not going to be looking at project management except from the perspective of the requirement to collect costs and revenues into the job so that we can properly understand our profitability and bill our customers correctly. What types of companies are we talking about here? Well, it's a surprising range of companies that operate in this way. Many industries that produce something for customers, there's a possibility to productize what they deliver, so they'll operate more on a standard product sales type process, or to bespoke what they do, so they would then operate on a project basis. And for many companies, it's going to be a combination of the two. So there are elements of a standard sales process as well as a project to deliver against the customer's specific needs. So clearly construction, engineering, the events industry, the creative industries, so design, software development, film, advertising and so on, all typically deliver projects to customers. Any business that bills for the expertise of their personnel on a time basis could also operate on a job costing basis, so that's most professional services firms. For some applications, they're going to be projects which have a definitive start and end, so installing a new kitchen or a bathroom or something like that, it's finished when it comes to the end. And others, there could be ongoing work, so for example work done against a support and maintenance contract would typically be ongoing. Obviously the contract may come to an end at some point. Okay, the needs of the business are based on two separate considerations. As is usually the case, we need to consider both how to control the process, the business process involved, as well as the information we want to obtain. Now, clearly there can be variations in that, and there may be specific things that are common in particular industries, but we're going to look at some standard needs to get us started. So we're going to think about a typical project process. We've simplified it. We start by looking at quoting or estimating the work. We're using two terms here. Quoting, we mean there'll be a fixed price for the whole project. Estimating, we mean we would agree rates, but then estimate how much work would be required, but we're actually charging for the amount of work done with an estimate of what we think it's going to cost up front. As part of the quote or estimate, we will need to consider how we budget our costs for the job. Can we record those? Can we monitor against that? We'll also consider the cash flow if we need staged payments from the customer. Once the customer has accepted our quote, then we're going to look at how we record costs. Cost recording includes the direct costs of the job, so things that we've purchased for the job, subcontractors, use of materials that we may be holding in stock, time that we're spending, so allocating time from timesheets, for example, and making sure all of those costs are recorded properly against the job. We need to bill the customer, either as a deposit payment against work done to date or as a final completion payment. And finally, we need to understand how we're going to get information out about the job with particular reference. Obviously, we want to know the job is operating profitably, and if the project spans our financial year end, we want to make sure we've still got relevant information for the lifetime of the job. So we're going to dive into those requirements and cover off how we would run that process. We're going to examine the support we've got in the different software packages for these requirements. We recognise the different ways we can support our needs using software. Today's not supposed to be about the features of software specifically, but we're going to be looking at different ways we might be able to achieve these goals in a particular package and examining the merits of those different approaches. Instead, we've chosen how we're going to work with the packages instead of looking at all the different options, and then exploring how that way of working supports our needs. Bear in mind that SAP Business One in particular, there are multiple ways to track our costs and revenues, and so alternative approaches are possible. And we discussed some of the different approaches more broadly in our last webinar, which was Profit Center Accounting. In SAP Business One, we're going to be using the Project Analysis tag to track our projects. So that's available in all licenses of the SAP product. In Sage 50, we're going to be using the Project Accounting module to track projects. This was available in Accounts Plus and Accounts Professional licenses. The latest version, which Sage are calling Sage 50C, they advertise that it's only available in Accounts Professional, so you'd need to check if you have an existing license what that license provides. This feature set needs to be enabled in Sage 50 before it can be used, and we've got one of our Got a Minute videos which is just coming up, which is going to show how to enable project costing. So here's the video.
Welcome to this Got a Minute video on project costing. To create projects in Sage, the project costing option needs to be enabled. Now I'm going to show you how to create a project so that we can distinguish between different products. And I'm going to call this project Useful Gadgets. And where it says customer details, it is fine to leave it blank, as you might have a project that's allocated to more than one person. I am now going to show how you can create an invoice which links back to your chosen project. Once this is updated to the ledgers, it will appear under the project activity. On the invoice, there is a cost code option. You can create your own cost codes and cost types if you wanted by choosing settings and then configuration.
There's no specific setup we need to enable projects in SAP Business One. in Business One, we're going to be assigning a project code to transactions. We'll not need to set an additional cost code because that's not required in SAP. Although if we do need further analysis, there are a number of options in SAP Business One which we could implement, and we covered off analysis options in Profit Center Accounting, our last webinar. One of the features we saw in the project accounting, where we just looked at that video, was that you can record a customer against a project. Now, one of the benefits of SAP Business One is that it can be easily extended to support the requirements of a customer. So we're just going to very quickly show another Got a Minute video which shows how to extend the standard project so that we can link a project to a specific customer. So here's that video coming up now.
Welcome to this Got a Minute video on adding user-defined fields in SAP. In this example, I'm going to add the field Business Partner to Projects. So if we go to Tools, Customization Tools, User-Defined Fields Management, and then we go to Master Data, and then Project Codes, and then we click Add, and then we add the title. So I'll put BP for Business Partner, and then I put Business Partner in the description. I'm going to make it alphanumeric so I can type in text, and I'll make it 30 characters long. And then I click Add, and it will add the field to the database. Select OK. So if I now go to Projects, we can now see this field, and we can update the business partner for the relevant project.
Okay, so that was how to record an additional field against a project. Obviously you can use different fields. How you then decide they're going to link within the product is beyond the scope of what we're doing today, but it's possible to build obviously an integrated system linking both internally and externally to other bits of data by customizing the tables quite easily. Great feature in Business One. Okay, so we're going to be considering how the different products support us in each of the stages we outlined earlier. Normally we don't want to spend too much time on the product features, but for this topic there's some significant differences which change how we need to run our processes, and so we need to present those differences, or there won't be enough context for you to make sense of the different approaches in terms of the software. So in SAP Business One, the project code which we're going to use is part of the standard analysis built into the transactions. SAP describe Business One as a single ledger system, and one of the things that that means is that all transactions are posted in exactly the same way. So any transaction that's going to update the ledgers can include a project code. Using project codes, because everything works the same way, is completely consistent across the software. In Sage 50 accounts, projects aren't equally well supported across the software. The project accounting functionality has been overlaid on the original software and attaches to the core software in different areas in different ways. This means that there isn't a consistent way to use the projects, and so how transactions are recognised against the project depends on what type of transaction they are. In each case where an attachment can be made, the user is expected to supply both a project reference and a cost code. So I'm just going to have a quick overview of the different levels. So I've got no slides for this because it would just get too cluttered and complex too quickly. But it will give you an idea of how the range of different ways of supporting projects varies across Sage 50 accounts. So purchase orders can be attached to a single project reference and cost code for the whole purchase order. However, if you go into the extended details for any item line, you'll be able to change the project reference and or the cost code for that line. Bizarrely, you can't put these fields into the main entry table. When you receive goods from a purchase order, you can specify a different project reference and cost code on the delivery, and so you could record different deliveries against different projects. However, if you enter multiple deliveries, although you can change the references on the first delivery, you can't change the references on subsequent deliveries. If you then use update ledgers to post a purchase invoice for the deliveries made, this does not recognise any of the project references you put in the system, so you'd have to enter them again. The system states that any project reference on the purchase order will be applied when issuing the goods from stock, but when issuing goods from stock there's no indication of a remembered project reference code, and so the goods need to be manually assigned to the project reference. If you enter purchase invoices using the batch entry screen, then each line of the batch entry can be associated with a project reference and a cost code. If we have a single invoice that relates to multiple projects, we'd have one line for each project in the same way that if a single purchase invoice relates to more than one nominal code, we must have a line for each posting. A service invoice can specify a project reference and the expanded details for each line on the invoice. This allows a single service invoice to be issued against multiple projects. A service invoice raised as a pro forma cannot be attached to a project. A product invoice cannot be attached to a project, with the exception that if special codes have been enabled, then special code S3 can supply a project reference. None of the other special codes or product codes can specify a project reference. A product invoice raised as a pro forma cannot be attached to a project even if special code S3 is used. Sales orders and quotations cannot specify a project reference except when using special codes, in which case special code S3 allows a project reference to be specified and only special code S3. Stock adjustments both in and out can specify a project reference. Stock transfers, which Sage 50 uses to convert components into a finished product using bill of materials, cannot be allocated to a project. This means if you want to issue a finished component to a project, you must first transfer the components into the finished product, then issue the finished product to the project. Bank payments made against the nominal ledger can be associated with the project reference. Bank receipts cannot. Journals cannot be associated with a project reference. As journals can't be associated with a project reference, the system provides a separate method to record transactions against projects without updating the nominal ledger. This means that the transaction must be entered in the usual way and then an additional note entered if a value as an input cost or an output revenue needs to be associated with the project. To associate a cost, these are entered as either charges or credits, credits obviously for revenue, which both allow the user to specify a quantity of a predefined resource if they choose to. Resources are defined and given a rate and can be used across all projects. Resources are very similar to non-stock product codes, but have less data associated with them, and crucially it's not possible to specify customer-specific prices for resources, which it would be with standard product codes. When entering credits or charges, the user does not have to enter a resource. They can give a narrative description, specify a quantity of one, and then enter the rate as the value. It's not possible to record costs or credits in different currencies. So, in summary, project accounting is supported in different ways across the Sage 50 software, as I stated earlier. Although the ability to record charges and credits provides useful note-taking for the project, these values are not actually present on the nominal ledger, and so there's no guarantee that they actually match the costs incurred, and they cannot be used as a reliable audit trail. In contrast to Sage 50 accounts, projects are built into the underlying ledgers in SAP Business One. As the project reference is built into the transaction posting, every part of the system can use projects in the same way. As the values in the project come from the actual posting to the ledgers, the values recorded against the project must always match the values posted to the ledger, and the transactions are part of the same robust audit trail as the rest of the transactions posted to the nominal ledger. As the project reference is applied at the transaction level, each line of a document, which will give rise to a posting to the ledgers, can be associated with a project reference. It's possible for a single document to reference multiple projects, so a single purchase order could order items for multiple projects and also items to go straight into stock without being allocated to a project. A single sales invoice could invoice a customer for work done across multiple projects. Each leg of a journal can specify a project reference if required. Of course, the journal overall must balance, but just as we don't expect the journal to balance on any particular nominal code, the journal does not have to balance for any specific project. Since the project references are attached to transactions in the audit trail, any of the reports that use those transactions can use the project codes for selection. So we could produce a trial balance for a project, which we would not expect to have to balance, as journals don't have to balance by project. At the end of a project, we'd expect to only be showing balances on P&L accounts for the project, and so the overall balance on the project will be a credit if we have more revenues than costs, and a debit if we have more costs than revenues. Of course, as SAP Business One is a proper multi-currency system, project transactions can be in any currency we're using in the system. And because the nominal ledger will always balance in our two reporting currencies, we know that any project reports from the ledger will also balance in those two currencies. Other differences between the way project accounting is supported between the two products include Sage 50 accounts. As every transaction that's associated with a project needs to specify both the project reference and the cost code. There's no link made within the software between any nominal codes and the cost codes, so it's possible to specify any combination of project reference, cost code and nominal code. Although this could be used deliberately, it seems likely that most users would expect that there is a link between the nominal code, what the cost is actually for, and the cost code, how the cost code should be grouped for reporting purposes in the project. In SAP Business One, there is no additional cost code. Usually the nominal code for the transaction is enough, so the nominal code alone specifies what the cost is. If there is a reason to group costs together for reporting purposes, this could easily be achieved either by grouping nominal codes or by using a second analysis code for the transactions. For a company that's delivering projects to customers against a contract, it's likely that project revenue and costs will be recorded against specific nominal codes. In SAP Business One, we have the opportunity to set certain nominal codes that we specify as requiring a valid project code to be specified for any transactions posting to that nominal code. In contrast, Sage 50 does not allow users to specify that project references must be added, and so transactions could be entered without a project reference. One great feature from SAP Business One, because projects are supported down to the transaction posting, is that we can produce a cash flow for a project. The SAP Business One cash flow allows us to not only project when invoices already issued or received are expected to be paid, but also to project when we expect to raise and receive invoices. Because the Online 50 service uses SAP Hana to power Business One, you can use the interactive Hana cash flow when planning your projects and determining what stage payments you will require from the customer. So in summary, the key difference between the two systems is that SAP Business One has integrated support for all financial transactions to include a project reference, while Sage 50 Accounts has a separate project accounting system that is overlaid on the financial accounting system, and the support for project accounting is inconsistent across the system. However, because there are menu options for the projects module in Sage 50, at first glance it may seem that Sage 50 has more support for job costing than SAP Business One. The reason that SAP Business One doesn't have a separate part of the program to deal with job costing or projects is because it's fully integrated into every other part of the software. Okay, we've covered off at lightning speed the core differences. I apologise there were no slides there. It's a lot of information that we've just dumped. But we've covered off the key differences between the ways the different packages support the job costing functionality through projects. So we're now going to briefly look at what's involved in recording the transactions and running the project processes. So let's look at the first part of our process, quoting and or estimating. What is it that we're actually going to need? We assume we're going to want the customers to accept our quote. Of course, sometimes you quote high because you don't want the work. We're going to need to communicate to the customer on what basis we're quoting for the job, the payment terms associated with that. If we issue unclear documentation at the start of the job, we may well have difficulties getting paid. So it's in our interests to be as clear as possible. Now we're going to expect that we've actually got separate documents that cover standard terms of business and any project management related terms. So the parts we need to concentrate on here are the actual costs the customer will incur to have us do the work. If we're estimating, then we need to have an agreed rate at which we charge for the work, which needs to be stipulated. Material costs also need to be stipulated, and if they can't be accurately determined, then ideally we need to stipulate the way in which they will be determined as they're incurred. So for example, we may agree that we charge materials at cost, at a fixed markup, at the rates published in the catalogue, or whatever basis we agree. If we're charging against agreed rates, we also need to record the rates we're using for the customer so that we bill them correctly. If your business only has one rate for all of your customers, I guess that's not an issue, but these days typically people will be giving preferred rates on particular types of work to particular customers. So we're going to look at how we raise a quotation or estimate for a job. So project is the term that's used in the software. So from what we've already said about the Sage 50 support for projects, it's clear that we can't raise a quotation and attach it to a project. There's no facility to have a service invoice quotation. The closest thing to that would be a service invoice pro forma, and that can't be attached to a project. We can, however, separately record the value quoted in the project's record. So against the project record, there's a field we can just type in manually what the quoted value is. For SAP Business One, we can, as we've said, attach a project reference to any business document which includes quotations. So we're going to have another Got a Minute video now, this time looking at how we raise a quotation or an estimate for a project in SAP Business One.
Welcome to this Got a Minute video on creating sales quotations in SAP. So I go to Sales Quotation, I select my business partner. So in this example, we're going to offer building consultancy at a rate of £1,000 per day for 5 days. We select the general ledger account. Consultancy fees, and then here we can select the project 1, and then we'll put in the total amount for 5,000, and then we select add. We can use sales quotation as an estimate, as the figures can be changed when the sales order is created.
Okay, so that's how to raise a document. All the documents work the same way as we said earlier, and attach the project references to that in SAP Business One. So if we're going to give specific prices to our customers and agree rates for work, we'll need to know what those rates are. In Sage 50, the system does allow us to set up customer price lists if we're invoicing against product codes, but as we've seen, we can't invoice product codes against a project. We'd have to use resources, and we can't set up customer specific prices for resources. So because it's not relevant to today's topic and we've got a lot to cover, we're not going to show the setup of customer price lists in Sage 50, but we have here got a quick video showing us how to set up customer price lists in SAP Business One.
Welcome to this Got a Minute video on creating price lists. So if I go to price lists, so to add a new price list, I go to data, add row. I'll give my price list a name. So for this one, I'm creating a price list for a particular project that will have different costings. I'm going to relate this price list to the regular sales price, and this will be 0.9 of whatever the sales list is giving for the price. So I'll click update, select yes all, and then I'll double click on this, and as you can see, it's calculated the prices. And if you wish, here you can tick manual and type in your own price, and then it will not be updated by the other price list. And this concludes the video on price lists.
Okay, so that was setting up the customer price list in SAP Business One. A normal part for us of quoting will be an understanding of what's involved in completing the work. Depending on the complexity, size, value of the job, we may also want to prepare a budget for the job. So although looking at budgeting in depth is going to be beyond the scope of what we're doing today, we're going to look at recording a budget against the project in our software. In Sage 50 accounts, we can record budget amounts against the cost codes for a project, and we've got a minute video showing us how to do that.
Welcome to this Got a Minute video on budgeting and profitability for projects. You may wish to set up your own cost types, which can be changed under configuration under settings. Here I'm setting up a cost type for interior design time. And once the codes have been added, choose Apply to save the changes. Now that I have created the cost types that I need to use, I can set the budget amount for each of these under the project for labour, materials and overheads. And once the budget is set, I can then see how my project is looking once my costs have been incurred. Once charges have been made for the project, I would now like to see how my project is looking in terms of profit. This is just a standard report in Sage called Profit Report by Customer and Project. And as you can see, this project has made profit.
Okay, so that was how to do it in Sage 50. In SAP Business One, the standard system, when we're putting in budgets, allows us to record a budget against a combination of a nominal code, including a project reference. So we've got another Got a Minute video showing us how to enter budget details, including the project reference in SAP Business One.
Welcome to this Got a Minute video on creating budgets in SAP. So first of all, we need to create the budget scenario, which is where we set up the budget. So we go to Data, Add Row, give the budget a name. So for mine, I'm creating a budget for Project 1, and I can select the project here, and then click Update, and then OK. So now we go to the budget. We select the budget, which is Project 1, and we can select the general ledger codes here. Click OK, and then we can enter in the budget. So for example, I've got raw materials here, so I'm going to put 1000 here, and then click Update. This will update the budget called Project 1, and it will update against the project and the general ledger code that was put in. And this concludes the video on creating a budget in SAP.
Okay, so that was how to set the budgets. Once a customer has accepted our quote and the project is underway, we're going to need to record the costs and revenues against the project. So in general, that means attaching the project code to the transaction in the software. There's going to be some differences here. We had some of those highlighted earlier. In SAP Business One, we can simply assign the project reference, as we saw in the earlier video about the quotation, to any transaction in the system. Remember, the project code can be used for anything that's going to update the ledgers. In Sage 50 accounts, we need to work around the limitations of the system if we want to record information against the project. I mentioned earlier the system includes support for charges and credits, which effectively give us notes of costs, so a memorandum posting, they're sometimes called, but they aren't linked to the actual transactions. That doesn't represent a cost on the ledger, and they need to be separately entered. We've got a video here, another Got a Minute video, showing us how to use the resources and record charges in the projects module.
Welcome to this Got a Minute video on project transactions. I need to allocate stock onto my project. My project is for a bathroom extension, and I need to allocate some floor tiles. And on the adjustments out window, I need to make sure the project reference, the cost code and the correct quantity are included. Here you can see the quantity in stock is now 50 rather than 300. To record my costs against the project, I can do this via the Charges button. I have already set up my resources and I am charging for interior design at £50 per hour for 5 hours. However, the resources are only set for project use only and they will not update the nominal ledger. When you need to raise revenue against a project, this option is next to the Charges button under Projects.
Okay, so that was how to record charges. You can record revenues in the same way as Tiffany mentioned there in that video. Okay, so let's summarize how we're recording our transactions. In SAP Business One, we can tag transactions with the project reference. If we stipulate that certain nominal codes must always have a project reference, then we can ensure that all transactions posting to those codes will have a valid project reference associated with the transaction. As the project code is built into the underlying transactions, that's all we have to be concerned about. In Sage 50 accounts, it's going to be more involved because of the dramas around the different ways in which the project accounting module touches the different parts of the core system. If we're purchasing for a project, we can attach the project reference to the purchase invoices. We must also specify a cost code separately to the nominal code for each of those purchases. Realistically, using purchase orders with projects is unlikely to be helpful. There are some features that come out of that. If you can use allocations in stock to earmark stock for projects, etc. We're not going to dive into that in any more detail today. With stock issued to a project, Sage 50 allows us to tag the issue of that stock with a project reference and a cost code, and this cost is then visible in the project. However, it's unlikely that's actually going to be what we want. In Sage 50 accounts, stock movements are not recorded on the nominal ledger. Any business that's holding stock needs to manually adjust the valuation of the stock on the nominal ledger through journals. Stock records include nominal codes for sales and purchases of that product, so a purchase order will give rise to a purchase invoice which updates the purchase nominal code. If this is set to a cost of goods sold account, which is what you'd expect, then all purchasing will debit that cost of goods sold account, not the stock account. When recording a stock adjustment, while it does make a note of the cost against the project, it doesn't actually update the ledgers. Instead, users of Sage 50 accounts are expected to be checking their stock holdings and entering journals to correct the stock holding position. What we probably want is that when we issue stock to a project, it results in a transfer of the stock's value from the stock account to a work in progress account. The only way to achieve this in Sage 50 is to manually enter a journal, and of course that journal can't be tagged to the project. In SAP Business One, the stock system is fully integrated with the nominal ledger. That means that all stock movements will update the ledger to reflect the movement as value on the ledger. If we're issuing stock, we can specify a nominal code that relates to this transfer of value, which could be a work in progress account. We could also set up different stock holding locations to be recorded against different stock holding accounts so that we can issue stock to the project by transferring items to the work in progress stock location. So in SAP they use the term warehouse. To record time against our project, we can use the resources and or charges to make a note of the costs, but of course this does not reflect the ledgers in any way. So according to our accounting policies that we've adopted, that's unlikely to be enough. For example, if we charge for our time, the cost of any time allocated to a project but not yet billed would normally be shown in a work in progress account as a current asset on the nominal ledger. If we're allocating the time of employees on our payroll, then we may want to show the time that it's been allocated to a project when it's used as a direct cost, and the time which is not allocated to a project as an overhead. In Sage 50 accounts, our only option would be to manually create journals to transfer costs, and of course these journals cannot be linked to the project in any way. In SAP Business One, we have more options according to what suited our processes. We can still enter the journals, but of course we can link each leg of those journals to a project. If we wanted to use product codes for time units, which would have the benefit that we can agree different rates with different customers and have the time units billed appropriately, then we could also do that. We'd want to avoid being too complicated, so we would need to think of how we process and record our payroll costs as well, but we could be booking into stock each month the total number of time units that we're paying our staff for at the appropriate cost that we're paying them. As their time is booked to projects, the time units are issued to that project. At the end of the month, any unused time is treated as a stock write-off against the appropriate nominal ledger code for the salaries overhead. When it's time to bill the customer, in Sage 50, we're likely to use a service invoice. That's what Sage recommend. We could use a product invoice, but we can't record the sale of a product code against a project unless it's the special code S3. This means that one of the key ways for us to obtain information from the system, so analysis of sales using product codes, that's going to be very difficult in Sage if we're using project accounting. The only way we can do this is to raise the invoices without referencing them to a project, because we can't, and then to record a credit on the project for the invoice, which won't be linked to either the invoice or anything on the ledgers. It's just a memorandum transaction. In SAP Business One, we can raise any of the system sales documents we choose and associate the whole document with a project or different lines on the document with different projects. This gives us much more flexibility and allows us all of the different analysis tools to be used as we require. Because the movement of stock codes is integrated to the ledgers, if we're billing product codes that we've issued to a work in progress nominal code, billing those products will transfer the cost of those product codes out of the work in progress account to the appropriate cost of sales account. When we want to review where we are on a project, in Sage 50 accounts we can look at the project's activity window, and there are a number of reports available. One of the reasons there are so many different reports is because of the different ways the project accounting system links to other parts of the Sage 50 product. This can also give rise to misleading information. If you record a project reference on a purchase order, this can be shown on the relevant project reports as a committed cost. If you specify the same project reference when you record the purchase invoice, that too will come up on the project report. If you then record the project reference when you issue stock to a project, this is shown as a committed cost on the project. So you've potentially counted for the cost 3 times within that project. Now, there are other ways of running the process which don't do that, but that seems like a natural thing for most users to do. Because SAP Business One has integrated the project code as an analysis field on all transactions that update the ledgers, any of the different reporting tools available can use the project code to select and report on transactions. This means that the reports we get for projects are completely consistent with the reports we have for ledger transactions. There can't be any discrepancies in values. I mentioned earlier that we would discuss the effect of year-end on our status with projects. As the Sage 50 project module is separate to the ledgers, any ledger transactions are not going to affect the data in the project system after you've recorded it. So that means our year-end process on the ledgers is not going to affect what we've got in the projects module. With SAP Business One, the data is drawn from the actual ledger transactions, but that's also why they're not affected by year-end either. The transactions posted aren't removed from the ledger at year-end. The year-end journal is separately posted, which transfers the year-end balances on the profit and loss accounts to the reserves. But this journal is not posted with a project reference, and so it will not affect any of the project transaction reports. Users of Sage 50 accounts will be aware of the limitations in reporting from ledgers for different financial years, but this is not an issue in SAP Business One. In Sage 50, the project costs are separate to the transactions on the ledger. When we come to the end of a project, both Sage 50 and SAP Business One then allow us to mark that project as being complete. We've covered a lot of ground. I've had to race through some of it. I apologise we haven't added some more visuals to make it a bit more exciting. we've spent more time and more detail looking at differences between the software systems than we normally do. Thank you very much for your patience so far. Before we move into the Q&A, I have a very brief summary of the two products. Now, we don't normally do this, as we're not normally focusing on products in our webinars. But as I mentioned earlier, the differences between the products are significantly different in this particular field. Sage 50 accounts. Now, I want to be clear. It may seem that we've been putting Sage 50 accounts down. We have lots and lots of users using Sage 50 accounts. As a small business general purpose accounting system, it's a great product. Lots of people have used it for years. If it meets your needs, it's a great choice. It's an elementary system for what we have for project accounting. It's been added on over the top of the core product, and as a result, the way you use it is a bit disjointed. It's not integrated to the transactions, but then the way it handles stock isn't integrated to the transactions on the ledgers either. So I guess that's not really surprising. If you've got basic needs, Sage 50 accounts may well be a good choice for you. If you're currently using Sage 50 and you're very happy with what it's doing, and you don't think that the shortcomings of the way the project accounting system works will be a problem for you, then by all means make the most use of the features in the product that you already have. As I said, Sage 50 is a great general purpose small business accounting system. The key concern for me is that because it's not integrated to the ledgers, there's lots of parts of the system where we end up recording the information twice. So once as a ledger transaction and once again for the project. And over the years, my experience is that leads to trouble because it isn't done consistently. It may not be done at all. And then obviously you won't have accurate information. You may not be billing the customer correctly, and so on. SAP Business One provides a system fully integrated with the transactions. There's no double recording required. It supports different business processes. All of the systems and information reporting and analysis tools that are in the system are going to be available to use the project reference at the transaction level. It's possible to set up the system to work supporting work in progress, stock consumption, produce cash flow forecasts, and all of the other features that come with Business One. All accessible and reportable by project because project is built into the way the transactions work. Okay, we're going to move into the Q&A. Today we have got some questions that were submitted in advance when people were using the booking form. So I've prepared an answer to those. So I've got slides for those questions. So I'll do those first, and then we'll run through other questions that have come up in the chat box. Do please enter any questions you've got in the chat box. We are a little bit over our normal time, but I'll get through any questions if I can. Some of them I may have to come back to you on if they're too difficult for me, but I'll get through any questions as quickly as I can. So the first question that we've been given in advance: how do you close down a job once you're satisfied it's complete? So clearly, whatever you're going to need to do must fit with your own processes, the nature of your projects. In terms of the software, both Sage 50 and SAP Business One allow you to mark a project as complete. Sage 50 allows different project stages to be set, and SAP Business One allows the analysis code to be set to be valid only for a particular date range. Normally, you'd want to have a closed down process for a project. Costs issued to the project that end up not being recoverable need to be written off. Obviously, you'd expect those costs to be sitting in a work in progress account. And of course, what you'd need to do for this in the software will depend on what software you're using and how you've chosen to use it. In Sage 50 accounts, as the project module is recording costs separately to the ledger transactions, then there's no need to clear out any unrecovered costs because they haven't actually hit the ledgers. With SAP Business One, if we have been tracking costs to a work in progress account, then we'd need to write off any unrecoverable costs at the point we close down the project. In this case, your close down process would include ensuring that the value of all work in progress for that project has been balanced down to zero. Okay, next question that we've had in. What's the best way to run a report for the auditors showing the level of work in progress at year end? So clearly, to report on the work in progress, you need to be recording it. As we've discussed, it's not easy to do this reliably in Sage 50 accounts, and I would have thought achieving the level of robustness that an auditor would want is going to be very difficult. If the company is big enough to be required to have an audit, it's likely that you'll need a more robust and scalable system, and so I'm going to base my answer on SAP Business One. So I said right at the start of the webinar, you need to understand both what your business process requires as well as what your information needs are to decide how a system should be used most effectively. If you know you need to have a robust position for your work in progress at year end, then I'd recommend using product codes to track all costs, including time costs, and as work progresses, issuing stock with these codes to a stock location you're using as work in progress. So if you set up that location, SAP's terminology, I think I said earlier, is a warehouse, to record bin locations within the warehouse, then as well as recording the project code on the transfer, which is going to give the financial element of the transaction, you could put all stock items for a particular project, record it as going into a bin with the same reference of the project. You can then run off a report of stock held by bin location, and it will list all of the costs recorded in the work in progress for that project. As you bill, you're issuing from work in progress, so your sales document would credit the work in progress account. That's and debit cost of goods sold as you're selling, so the work in progress is being run down to zero as you bill. If you've got a time recording system that allows the time allocated to each project to be accurately captured, then that can be relatively easily linked to handle the booking of time as stock codes in SAP. So if somebody has interest in that, please talk to us about how we might do that. We've got a whole range of import, export and process features available in our Ambition Forms product, and that can be used in scenarios just like this for time recording. Okay, next question we've had in advance. How do you control cost overruns? That's an excellent and very practical question. If I put my ISO hat on for a moment and think about the risk analysis that goes with a project, there's an ISO risk and assessment methodology that we broadly follow as part of our information security processes. When we identify the risk for a cost overrun, we've got to think about what controls we can put in place for dealing with that risk. That's how risk assessment works in the ISO framework that we use. So one control is to get rid of the risk by passing it on to the customer so they agree to pay for your time expended at an agreed rate rather than a fixed price for the project. That's not always an option. Depending on your industry, that might be very difficult to do. And of course, even when customers do agree, they can then argue they shouldn't have to pay you for time that you may have lost due to mistakes or the action of your chosen third party or whatever. So the first thing we really need to have to address the issue is accurate and up-to-date visibility of our costs. If we can't accurately determine our costs, then we have no hope at all of controlling them. The sooner we know about an overrun or a potential overrun, the better. If we can determine that an overrun is likely before it happens, we may even be able to prevent it from happening. And even if we can't prevent it from happening, a customer that we speak to about a possible overrun before it happens is much more likely to be receptive to a share of that cost. The second thing we must have is a robust process that controls costs. This could involve better estimating and or forecasting, and will almost certainly involve a procurement process that will allow us to have visibility of costs before they're committed to. Ideally, we're going to want a procurement process to work on a delegated budget basis, so that within an agreed budget, we've got a budget for the job, subject to spending levels, appropriate individuals can commit to costs. If we know we're going to spend £1,000 on materials, then someone who is in charge of the job should be able to order those materials. We have, I mentioned just a moment ago, ambition forms. We have a procurement process as part of our ambition forms solution, working on delegated costs. And our next scheduled webinar, so we won't be doing one in August, end of September, last Thursday in September, we're going to do a webinar on commitment accounting and procurement, which deals with running delegated budgets. If cost overruns are happening because time is being used in an uncontrolled manner, so rather than things that you're buying that you're spending too much time, you need to have a process to review time estimates and your use of time. Sometimes there are ways to pass this on to customers. As an example, we work with a number of accountancy service providers. Recently, I was discussing how services are delivered to clients with an accountant providing a bookkeeping and management accounting service, and they'd adopted a scale of charges depending on when customers wanted the work to be done. They'd found that too many of their clients gave them work at the last minute, which prevented them from properly scheduling what had to be done, so they discounted their services for clients that would bring them the work early. That might be one option. If cost overruns are because staff are taking too long to complete work, more supervision of the staff may be required. So although they booked 6 hours to job, have they actually been working on the job for those hours? You may also need to think about training, not just in capability to do the work, but also in understanding what the time budget for the work is and how important it is to bring work in on time and to hit the budget. Okay, so those are the questions that were submitted in advance. I'm going to move on now and look through the chat box. I've just got to scroll through and find it, if you bear with me, and we'll see what other questions we have. Okay, right, first question in the box. Are you covering Sage job costing today? No, we haven't, as you can tell by looking at it. Sorry about that. I probably should have made that clear at the beginning of the webinar. We did have some people emailing us before, and we've been in communication with them. We do have users running Sage 50 job costing, or Sage job costing it's called, on the Online 50 service. It's part of our standard offering, but some time ago Sage said they were not going to issue any new keys for new customers that wanted to use it. So although we have users that are using it, if you have a license, we could certainly look at hosting that. We can't issue it as a new product, which is why we haven't included it today. So they have updated the product in terms of updating links for using different versions of Sage Accounts and Payroll, but they haven't actually updated the core product for many years. They said when they first launched Project Accounting, as I recall, that it was going to replace job costing. It still doesn't really have all the features that job costing had, but if they're no longer issuing licenses for it, we haven't included that. Sage, of course, have a range of products, and what I suspect they will do is, if you have requirements that go beyond what Sage 50 does, they will talk to you about upgrading to another product, and they'll probably say, let's go for something that has integrated stock, better analysis, and so on. If you do need more than Sage 50 accounts, we haven't found a product offering that's better value than SAP Business One. That's why we got so excited about it when we introduced it a few years ago. And for the price, as you've seen today, you get a kind of a fully integrated, flexible, scalable system. Okay, let's have a look through here. Next question. What's Hana cashflow? Okay, can't see who's asked that. It's Hana is spelled H-A-N-A. It's not a girl's name, although of course you can't be forgiven for thinking it's a girl's name. Hana is the name of SAP's advanced in-memory database. So they use it on a whole range of systems, anywhere where they need to do real-time information analysis. So things like weather forecasting, Formula One, where they're trying to get feedback and plot what's going to happen with the race as it goes around the track. They're using SAP Hana. They're introducing it very aggressively into their big corporate enterprise systems. For our SAP Business One service, we took a decision. We were only going to run it on SAP HANA, so we've invested in the HANA infrastructure to run that, and that gives really, I'm not going to go into HANA in too much detail now because the question was about the cash flow, but that gives a very fast information retrieval, ability to do lots of different queries and so on. And so what that means is that when you want to run a cash flow, traditionally, software projecting a cash flow has to do a lot of calculations, has to retrieve a lot of data, obviously depending on how many transactions you have, calculate expected payment dates, and from that it can then construct a cash flow. Often that's a process that takes some hours in reasonable sized systems. Because of the power of HANA, and as I say, I'm not going into that you get the HANA cash flow can do it pretty much in real time. So you'll have a slider and you'll say, if I change this parameter and just slide it out, and you'll see the projected cash flow changing. You can also include draft items in there. So if you've got it's a draft item, you can create, for example, a sales order or a purchase order as a draft document. It knows it's draft, so it's not a real one, but you can then include the draft one in the cash flow. So you could include draft documents in your project when you're setting up the budget, and that will then give you the forecast of all the expected costs across the budget. So HANA cash flow is running on SAP HANA. If you have SAP Business One for SAP HANA, which is what we provide on the Online 50 service, then you're able to use that as part of the core product. Okay, next question. Okay, we often get this one. SAP Business One sounds very expensive, ! Yeah, I always thought that. I mean, you hear SAP and you think, you need a cast of thousands to implement it. It's going to take months. It's going to come in over budget. It's going to cost millions. Now, SAP obviously do really big company systems, and often for really big company systems, you are talking about, maybe not thousands, but a very large implementation team, a very long implementation project. It's very expensive to put the system in. But SAP Business One isn't like that. And because we've got a commercial arrangement with SAP as an OEM partner, we've got some really great terms. So you can find out a bit more about this on the Online 50 website if you get a chance to go there. So www.online50.net. So there's a tab on the menu that says Online SAP. Go into there. There's a couple of pages I'd recommend looking at. One, I think, it just says SAP Business One from Online 50, which talks about the commercial proposition, and that's got a summary of some pricing in there. And there's also a comparison with Sage 50. So it compares Sage 50 and SAP. So just to kind of run over that, the entry-level Business One price is £26 per user for the software license. Sage currently, for Sage 50C, Accounts Professional, which, as I said earlier, is what they're advertising as the project module, as I recall, is £125 per month listed from Sage. Because of the way Sage works, we need to provide something called a Sage data server for the latest versions, which increases our hosting costs. So there's going to be a difference of, for a single user system, the monthly costs for SAP are going to be well over £100 cheaper. However, we do of course charge some time to set it up because it's a more complicated product. We put our hands up to that. We do have a great value fast track setup, which is a reasonably basic implementation, but it's certainly enough for a small company to get going. So you'll pay more up front, but you could then be paying less per month. Now, obviously, costs will depend on number of users, the licenses per user. If you have more than 5 users, you can't have that £26 license. That's how SAP have done it. So we'd need to look into that. But we have got single users of SAP Business One. We've got single user charities. Obviously, charities are quite price sensitive. And it is an effective solution at the small end, which is one of the reasons why when we discovered the project, as I said earlier, we got so excited about it. Okay, I've got another question here. Let's see what this says. Isn't using a product code for time used on a project over the top? Well, it could be, I guess. It's going to depend on what you need. As I said, I think I said right at the beginning, when you're looking at a system, you need to think about 2 things: what your business process requires, so your process control needs, and what information you need out from the system. And you've got to design the system so that it can support both of those. And if the process involved in thinking about product codes makes the system difficult to use, then don't do it. Do what's easy. That's my motto. But of course, as I was saying earlier, and the question we had about a robust audit trail on the WIP, it's pretty hard to beat the robustness of an audit trail that's built into the nominal ledger transactions. And as in SAP Business One, I appreciate we may be talking about Sage 50 as well, but in SAP Business One, all of the stock movements represent a transaction on the ledger. And it's pretty hard for an auditor to question the robustness of that. Obviously, you might be posting the wrong data, but once the data is posted, it's going to be consistent. If you want information about different types of products that are sold, you want to bill time at different rates, then using product codes could work very well for you. However, depending on how you run your staff, how your payroll works, the extra overheads in terms of managing those product codes may mean that it is over the top. So you need to look at what's appropriate in your particular situation. Okay, I've got one more. I think it's one more in here. Let's have a look. Okay, so this is a question relating to use of purchase orders in Sage 50 accounts and projects, saying that somebody using it and they don't get the double costing that I was talking about. Yeah, so I'm sorry if I've given a false impression. Sage 50 is not going to deliberately create costs additional times. I mentioned, I think, that using purchase orders in SAP, you can do, I think they call it an allocation within stock to a project and then issue from the allocation. That remembers that allocation is for the project, but that's only ever used with projects, so it's a separate way of doing it. A user who's used to running a normal Sage 50 process but knows they need to put a tag on it would probably expect that when they book the purchase invoice, they need to say that's for the project. And if they do a stock issue rather than using, as I just mentioned, this allocations feature, that they need on the issue to say it's for the project. I think that's a reasonable thing for a user to expect. But if you do that, you end up multiple counting for the costs. So I'm not saying that Sage will deliberately do that. Of course I'm not. I'm just saying that it's one of the things that comes out of the fact that the way you use the product, the project accounting within the product, it's disjointed, and because of that, one, there's no direct link to the ledgers, but two, even where you do get that, particularly around this whole issue of using stock with a project, so you've got the purchase orders, the invoice, the stock issue, it seems to me it's not intuitive to the users as to how it would work. And I think, I can't remember now, but I think I was making the contrast with the situation with SAP Business One, where because it's built into the core process, it's no different, your process, whether you're dealing with projects or not. You just record the project code. If you know you need to have a project code, you can specify this nominal ledger account must always have a project code specified. Okay, so I'm just having a look in the chat box. I can't see any other questions in there. I apologise if I've missed it. I don't think I have. We won't, as I said earlier, we won't be having another webinar in August. So it's normally the last Thursday of the month is when we run our webinars. So it'll be the 28th of September. And we've scheduled to look at commitment accounting and procurement. So commitment accounting is commonly used when you've got delegated budgets for purchasing, very popular in local authorities and that kind of scenario. Typically you're looking at budgeting by arbitrary periods. You want to devolve authorization so people are empowered to make actions against budget within certain parameters. It's not something that's easy to do in most financial software because of the aspect of delegated budget. So we thought that would make an interesting webinar. So we will be emailing out regarding that in due course. The webinar for today, we've got a recording. We'll need a little bit of time, as we normally do. We'll put the slides together to cover off those additional questions that we had at the end, and then we'll get that uploaded into our Online 50 YouTube channel, and we'll send everybody who's booked a link. So thank you very much for your patience. We've been going on 10 past 12. Actually, I guess that's not too bad. Sometimes, depending on questions, we can go on a bit longer than that. Thank you very much for your patience today. We've covered a lot of ground. There was quite a lot of product detail. If anybody has any questions, feel free, obviously, to email us further questions. Have a great August, and I hope you join us again for a webinar in September. Thank you very much, and goodbye.